Well, it was this particular conversation, which wasn't supposed to go public, that's got tongues wagging across the US after being captured by cameras word for word. In what they thought was a private exchange, Barack Obama told his Russian counterpart that he'll be more flexible on the missile defense issue after the election. RT's Gani Chichikanthan has more on the reaction that triggered on Capitol Hill.
It appears Mitt Romney has no doubt that Russia is America's #1 geopolitical enemy. Well, this is not the first time presidential hopeful Mitt Romney is playing Russia card in this election season. He has recently called Prime Minister and Russia's future President Putin a threat to global peace and stability. It has to be said, American politicians have mastered the art of creating and bashing boogeymen, especially when election campaigns are underway. To some, like Mitt Romney, dragging out the Cold War skeleton from the closet seems most fit. Actually, President Medvedev commented along those lines, saying, "Mr. Romney, it's time to move past the good old Hollywood stereotypes." But easier said than done. The Cold War may long be over, with the leaders of Russia and America, looking for common ground under the banner of a reset in relations. But Cold War sentiments still run high in the minds of some U.S. politicians, some of them very influential. Mitt Romney is not alone. There are also the likes of Senator John McCain, a man who is stalking that mindset. What's interesting to note, as we know, Romney's latest comments about Russia came in the context of President Barack Obama's hot mic moment with Russian President Dmitry Medvedev Monday after a meeting in Seoul. Obama was heard telling Medvedev he would have more flexibility on missile defense after the presidential election. The U.S. missile defense shield in Europe is one issue that still sticks out in U.S.-Russia relations. But despite certain differences, both Russian and U.S. leaders agree that the reset has worked with regards to Russia joining the World Trade Organization, for example, or cooperation in Afghanistan. But one of the points of Mitt Romney's foreign policy agenda, you can find it on his website, he has a section dedicated to Russia, is to reset the reset with Russia. But it looks like he's winning the Republican nomination. America will soon face a choice between Romney and President Obama. There are lots of people who disapprove of President Obama's policies, but most experts agree that President Obama will inevitably win the election because lots of Americans are plain scared of having someone like Romney as their future president.
Gani Chichikanthan, correspondent in Washington. Let's get the thoughts now of Chris Lapatina, shall we? An analyst for the Democratic Strategist Journal, joining us on the line from Washington, D.C. as well. Chris, good evening. Well, it seems the main conclusion being drawn by Obama's Republican rivals over that leaked conversation is that Russia is Washington's enemy #1. Why is that?
Right. Well, of course, it's silly, and as we just heard in your setup piece, it's this need for people running for office to come up with something to scare voters into supporting them. After a while, you can't keep bashing Obama because people tune that out. So in the case of Santorum, who's one of the Republican candidates, and even Romney, they took advantage of the President Obama's trip to meet with your president, and it is an opportunity to try to scare people about Russia. But of course, as you know, in a democracy, what leaders or wannabe leaders say doesn't matter unless there's popular support. And I can assure you there is no evidence of any popular support for bashing Russia, for hostility towards Russia, for anything that would create Russia into an enemy instead of a country that we have a good working relationship with.
That's good to hear. Chris, let's just imagine for a second that the hardline Republican bluster on Russia, China, Iran and other countries becomes the United States' real strategy if they get in. What then?
Well, again, it's interesting with Mr. Romney in particular. He seems to endorse many of the things that President Obama has done and just says ultimately he wants to do things in a different way. So if it becomes the case where Mr. Romney beats President Obama, most people who think about these things know that Romney's rhetoric will not match what he'll do as president. He knows that there's no public support, and B, there's no end game that makes any sense for the United States to have a hostile relationship with Russia. It doesn't make any sense. We both have too many things in common as countries than we do dividing us. And Romney's smart enough to appreciate that. way.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned just now that your take is that most Americans don't have such a problem with Russia, the other countries we've been talking about.
Right.
Do Americans really want to see such a hard line leading their country in the first place? What is his position? How is he likely to fare?
Well, again, in your setup piece, there is some sentiment that's left over from the Soviet Union. There is an element of Americans, both on the liberal side and the conservative side, that almost suffer from paranoia about enemies seen and unseen. And in the case of the Republican candidates, they're trying to tap into some of those people who tend to vote in these what we call primary elections to be the nominee for the party. But as a general rule, there's nothing out there, and Americans don't think about Russia anymore, for better or worse. We have other issues. We have domestic issues that concern us. Our number one threat, if you want to consider a threat, is China, which is the biggest economic challenge. We like Russia, we face national security threats from terrorists. So this idea that somehow or another Russia is a concern for Americans, it just doesn't add up at all.
Nonetheless,
with a very small sliver of people.
Nonetheless, the missile defense shield issue, this long-running, ongoing missile defense shield, is an issue. We heard what was said off camera there that we shouldn't have heard, but it's been going on for so long. Is there a real possibility that this can be sorted out now and soon?
Yeah, again, I think what you heard your president say yesterday, I think, in the response to Mr. Romney, is that actually the relationship between our two countries in the last 3 years has been good and has been productive. And just think of if the United States had tried to develop this shield in 1990, the kind of reaction that we would have gotten from Russia. I think Russia is much more comfortable. The Russian people are much more comfortable with the United States and our intentions, and we're certainly much more comfortable with the Soviet Union, or the Russia and the former Soviet states, and your intentions, and I think it's just a process where we can compromise to get something that works for both sides.
All right, Chris, thanks ever so much for your thoughts. Chris Labattina, their analyst for the Democratic Strategies Journal. Appreciate it.